I had a very, what I think to be a very important, actionable insight about the nature of fear. Fear is the mind killer. We've all read that bumper sticker before. But even though we know this, we know that fear is the mind killer, many of us, I believe, certainly I do, find ourselves in the throngs of fear and anxiety on a regular basis. The lived experience of fear is something I am well acquainted with, even though I know that fear is the mind killer. And today, my dear friend Marwan brought up my preoccupation with death, which is definitely one of my greatest fears, right? I fear annihilation. I fear the end of all that is me. I am deeply attached to Jason Silva, right? And what he said to me, I'm in my 30s, right? I'm a young, healthy guy. You don't have to really start worrying about death until you grow older. And so what Marwan said to me was, he said, you know what, Jason, your fear, your true and real and present fear of death actually makes death feel nearer. And it was like my brain exploded, because the irony of a person who fears death is that we want everything except death to feel near, right? We're running away from death because it terrifies us. The manic incongruity of mortal beings who dream of immortality. And so when he says to me, your fear of death makes death feel nearer, struck me as an annihilating insight, because no self survives a real conversation. This is what that poet meant when he said the self doesn't survive a real conversation, because I was slayed by that insight. My fear of death makes death feel nearer. So that means that it is not death itself that causes me a headache. It is simply the fear of it, the dread that it awakens in me. And so this gave me a great insight about fear in general, whether it's death that you fear, or failure that you fear, or madness that you fear. It is the fear of it that haunts your days and nights. So, something else that terrifies me is losing control, right? Losing my mind, getting carried away in my art or in my creativity or in the manic geometries of associational thinking and just taking things too far. You hear about artists like this all the time. They take it too far. They lose themselves. They were never the same again, whatever. Their work destroys them. And so that's another fear that I have, right? The fear of madness. But what happens instead is that the fear itself becomes a kind of madness. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. For it is madness that you fear, but it is not madness that you have. What you have instead is just the fear of madness, which ironically is itself a kind of madness, because you are no longer in control, right? You fear losing control, but you've already lost it the moment you've become afraid of losing it. For the fear of losing control means you've lost effectively all control to the fear. Now you are possessed by fear, so of course you're not in control. You are in the thicket of panic and anxiety. You are in its grips. So it's a very interesting, it's almost like, there's paradox there, and there's elements of the way that we can think ourselves into sort of self-fulfilling prophecies. So again, I fear death, and the fear of death, ironically, paradoxically, makes death feel nearer. And so it robs me of the full vitality of life. I shrink away from life, and I die before I die. Ernest Becker calls it Jonah syndrome. And the same fear of madness. Well, what afflicts me instead, what haunts me instead, what maddens me instead is the fear of madness itself that becomes the madness. And fear of failure too. If you're constantly afraid to fail, you never act, you never do. And if you never do, well, then effectively you failed, right? So the fear of failure that holds you back from trying becomes then the self-fulfilling prophecy of you failing because you never tried to do anything. So of course you never achieved anything. So there's a lot of actionable insights here, but the more important insight, I think, is simply the realization that the cave you fear holds the treasure you seek. The only way to kill fear is to face fear, right? So fear will win unless you do exactly that which you're most terrified of doing, right? That's why Jamie Wheal and others talk about the necessity of slaying your ego or slaying yourself, practicing, death practices, these things that shatter all your stories. Fuck your story, as Jamie Wheal says. And then something that persists, something that survives, can then be reconstructed. A new phoenix can rise from the ashes. This is what people mean by death practices. And so the cave that we fear does hold the treasure we seek, and so it's a very important thing for me. I can feel my solar plexus still, aching for reconciliation because I've put myself really on the line here, right? And so what is the answer? What is the answer? What is the answer? The answer is we need not be afraid of that which we fear. The answer is we need not be afraid of that which we fear. In fact, that which we fear is that which we must do. And it is only this way that we move forward. And that's an amen. That's a stand up and applause moment, right? That really, encapsulates what all moments of transcendence are about, which is that they are surprising and also inevitable. I never thought that it was exactly by doing what you're afraid of that you slay what you're afraid of and move forward. So that's a surprise, but it's also inevitable. For in retrospect, it's like, of course, that's exactly what needed to happen. Of course, it is facing your fear that annihilates the fear, that ends the fear, and that allows you to break through to the other side. So thank you, Marwan, for making me realize this today, and thank you guys for listening. And I hope that this is something that I think I can. This is my yellow brick road now. I must do that which I fear. And I think that will be the step function that I need for the next stage of my life. Wow, that feels good. That feels clean and clear and in integrity. And for that, I am grateful. Yeah. Thanks for listening. I hope that there's some material here that you can relate to and that can add value to your life as well. Much love, guys. Cheers. Wow.